a relationship is difficult at Twin Oaks, can be difficult. And part of the reason is, you know, clearly in the mainstream, you break up with your partner if you don't live together and you don't work in the same place, you know, you may not even see each other. And sure, it's difficult and it hurts. And you muddle through that as best you can. And at Twin Oaks, you're dealing with that hurt and that muddling, and there's the person across from you in the line for dinner that night, and there they are at the music gathering that you go to that evening, and maybe they're even sitting with this new person that they are interested in or whatever, and it's right there in front of you. And that can be even more painful than just trying to deal with it, you know, without all that continuing to cross over and see that person. Different things happen with that at different times with different people. Some people, it's too much, and they leave the community. One or the other person leaves, they decide, and it may be that it's just too painful, but also that's the sort of the switch for them, that Twin Oaks just is no longer quite what they wanted, and that's the sign that it's time for them to move on. Other people do, especially people who are more sort of process-oriented, may have, you know, a lot of check-in times, may have draw other people in to help them even craft agreements about how they want to literally separate from each other over time. We've had people who've had agreements where one can go to the main dining hall at a certain night, you know, to get their meal, and then, or they go before 6 or after 6:30 or something like that. And I think for a lot of people hearing that, that can seem very artificial, and maybe it is, but to some extent, that's what's working for those people, and they've decided to try it that way. And it is a way of having a little buffer zone from seeing that person, and every time you lay eyes on them, sort of that fresh, what arises inside from that. And again, it can seem awkward, and I think it sometimes can be awkward, and I think it can be beneficial as a transition period time. And as more time passes and you get more support, or maybe get in a new relationship or whatever, or just get more centered with what's happening, then it becomes more normal. And, you know, again, this is the same as other places. Some past partners you remain friends with, some you don't have anything to do with, some you have animosity with, and that's the same here too. It's the spectrum. In terms of getting together with people at Twin Oaks, of course, it's this incredibly romantic place in so many ways. There's, you know, you can go on a canoe ride, you can like walk through the meadow, you can go to all these different events that we offer. There's just a lot of sort of enjoyable opportunities in which to spend time with someone and get to know them. That's really fun. Sometimes it's sort of, I think, not tricky, but difficult for people, especially who are more of a private person, because it's not always, but often obvious enough to everyone when people are getting together. But it's unclear how together are you going to get, you know, how permanent is this going to be? And that, again, that's nerve-wracking enough to experience on your own, but with all these other people watching every step of the way, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you get the idea. That, you know, that happens. And, you know, we call it commune TV. Like, we don't have TV, excuse me, I mean, we have the internet, but, you know, what's more interesting than the human drama unfolding before your very eyes? And that's what's happening. So that's an interesting aspect of living here. There's a sense in which living at Twin Oaks, you could be said, it's like living in a fishbowl. You know, you do have all these eyes on you to some extent. You know, we're aware of each other and what's happening and going on in our lives to some extent. And I think that it's partly personality dependent. For some people, whatever, you know, they're out there, they're who they are, and that's easy for them to do. And yes, they may, you know, of course they're influenced by other people, but that's a relatively comfortable position for them to be in. And they're that way wherever they are, here included. Other people, I think, hold their cards closer to their chest, you know, and it's a little more difficult to just let themselves be out there in this huge pool in a way. And I think, again, according to that personality, it can be more challenging at times, especially when something sort of particularly is up with you, you know, either quote positive or quote negative, that people are going to be naturally paying more attention to. And I think that can be hard for those people. We have a tradition here called mailbox letters. Every member has a mailbox where you can just keep stuff in. It's like a little cubby. And sometimes people will put out a mailbox letter talking about what's going on with them, especially when some issue is up for them. And some part of that purpose is just for information, to let people know directly, so sort of sidestepping the rumor mill and the gossip mill so they can hear it from the person themselves. And sometimes those letters will include information like, it's really helpful for me to talk about this. Please approach me if you want to support me. Or, you know what, this is just too tender, so just please don't raise it when you're around me, even if you have caring thoughts, you know, communicate them some other way, or send me psychic love or something. So that's a way in which people can directly put it out there to people. But again, even that it's making yourself vulnerable in front of a group, and that is difficult. At Twin Oaks, we live much of our lives based on trust on many, many different levels. You know, we don't have locks on our doors. For a long time, we didn't even have passwords on our email. You could just open up, you know, and it's not that there's never any problems from that level of trust, but by and large, it works really well. It's a group of very caring people who've been drawn here because they want to have this value of, our bylaws say, treat each other in a kind and caring manner or something like that. And that is generally the culture of Twin Oaks. In the early days, there was a spoken norm of no gossip, and that was during the days of behaviorism, and they were really trying to, you know, shape everyday behavior very verbally and intentionally. And that, even though behaviorism fell out of favor very early, that particular norm of no gossiping had some staying power. We don't have that so much now. For myself, personally, I do make a difference between what I think of as malicious gossip and what some people might call information sharing. Again, it's very tempting to, who doesn't want to know what's going on with so-and-so? You know, that's very interesting to us, our lives, each other's lives. And there's a level at which it's not interest anymore. It's, you know, there's a negative undercurrent, or there's something else that's not a helpful sentiment in that. And, you know, so we're swimming around in that mix, and I think we are generally on the more comfortable, okay, healthy, caring side. And if we drift too far the other way, somebody is sure to speak up and say, hey, you know what, like that doesn't feel good, or that's not right, or I don't like this. And I appreciate that I live in a culture and that's how it is. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, there's also a piece of Twin Oaks culture. It's a mix, like everywhere it's a mix, but I feel like we are much less likely to dwell on the side of denial. When something uncomfortable or dysfunctional or unpleasant is happening, there's a level on which it is more comfortable to just pretend it isn't happening, or look the other way, or just, you know, move through it regardless. And it's not that that doesn't ever happen here. Certainly it does. And as I said, I feel like we are more likely, that someone here is more likely to feel like it is a safe space in which to say, yeah, that doesn't feel good, or I noticed this happening, and what's that about, and why is this happening, to name it and to question it. And actually, on a personal note, again, that was a big thing that originally drew me to community. You know, I grew up in a violent home, and many people knew that was happening, and that was just accepted, that that's the way it was. And people just would pretend that wasn't what was happening. And that is not a loving, healthy, sustainable way to live for anybody. And so I think to live in a place here where, you know, for one thing, we're nonviolent, so those kinds of activities, the really extreme things, you know, it's just mostly, at least, isn't what happens here. But if something ever does come up, like something that is that extreme, or even something less extreme that's still not functional, that the cultural norm is to say, hey, wait a minute, instead to just, you know, pretend that's not happening. I feel like that's really important with any group of people living together, trying to create their lives together like we are.